Well, I think a central bank digital currency is a terrible idea.
Why isn't this a bipartisan issue?
And so we had some very liberal Democrats. Adam Schiff voted for my CRA. Chuck Schumer voted for my CRA. I laughed when Schumer voted for it. I said, shoot, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should vote no on my own provision.
Are its own policies getting in the way?
Listen, I serve in a body where the median age is about 106. I have colleagues that reminisce about Eisenhower. And it wasn't too long ago, one of my colleagues, and this is real, described the internet as, quote, a system of tubes. This is not a technologically savvy group.
Senator Ted Cruz has emerged as one of crypto's most vocal allies in Washington.
And I'll tell you what, we are also going to unleash crypto.
An early adopter, a miner, and a lawmaker who's determined to shape the country's digital asset policy. We caught up with him to find out exactly why he believes Bitcoin should flourish in America and what he thinks will stand in its way.
Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. I know that you've been busy in the Senate with some legislation that is really pertinent to our industry, but before we get to that, let's just set the stage first. In the 2024 election, crypto was the largest sector to support candidates, with super PAC spending really hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly in congressional races. Now, you only received roughly $30,000 in support, I believe, but candidates like Bernie Moreno and Alyssa Slotkin received tens of millions. We actually just released a documentary that delves into crypto and the elections, so give it a watch when you can. But from where you sit, how impactful was the crypto industry in shaping the outcome of this election cycle?
Well, I don't know how impactful it was. I will say I believe in crypto and I believe in Bitcoin. I had been the leading defender of Bitcoin and crypto in the United States Senate for a number of years now. And in the last 4 years in the Biden administration, we saw an administration that had a profound antipathy to Bitcoin and to crypto writ large. And it is an antipathy fundamentally because they want to control it and they cannot control Bitcoin or crypto. And it's why I think there are many in the Democrat Party, led most notably by Elizabeth Warren, who want to destroy Bitcoin and want to destroy crypto.
Crypto is often dependent or has a lot of correlations with the macro markets. You've said that you wanted the U.S. to lead in financial innovation, but we're seeing a lot of volatility in the markets. Today, as we're recording this, it was just when Donald Trump announced tariffs. The markets have been a little shaky. Goldman Sachs even raised their risk of a recession to, I think, 35%. That's on the macro scale, but for crypto, it's been even tougher. Some are calling it a bear market. So how do you see Trump's economic vision lining up with the conditions needed for crypto to truly thrive here in America?
Well, listen, I will say crypto and Bitcoin both have always had a high degree of volatility. But I'm long-term bullish. Listen, if you're engaged in short-term speculation in Bitcoin or crypto, there's an enormous amount of risk to that. And so my view, I am much more of a long-term investor than trying to time the market of what's going to go up or down. I think we've seen historically the crypto market has greater volatility than the stock market. And that means trying to catch the timing takes an expertise a heck of a lot greater than I have.
Sure. But I guess the question is whether this administration is creating the right environment for crypto to truly thrive, or are its own policies getting in the way?
Well, listen, what I'll say on that is the previous administration was putting in place policies that would do enormous damage to crypto and Bitcoin. If you look at whether it was Gary Gensler or Elizabeth Warren, they hate crypto, they hate Bitcoin. And Elizabeth Warren hates Bitcoin for the same reason communist China does. Look, China banned Bitcoin because they cannot control it. And Elizabeth Warren and many of the Democrats, they want to control it. If you look at the closing days of the Biden administration, they put in place a decentralized finance rule that would have been utterly devastating to the crypto industry. With President Trump in the White House, I introduced what's called a Congressional Review Act resolution, which is a way Congress can repeal a regulation. And my Congressional Review Act resolution was to repeal Joe Biden's DeFi rule, the IRS rule, in midnight rule as the Biden administration was going out. We took it for a vote on the floor of the Senate, and it passed overwhelmingly. The vote was 70 to 28. It was a huge bipartisan vote overturning the Joe Biden anti-crypto rule. So what I would say is under Donald Trump, I think you'll see a regulatory environment where crypto and Bitcoin can flourish and continue to grow. And I think we're going to see the economy move forward and flourish and grow as well.
Republicans hold a pretty narrow majority in the House, especially, and I think you're not quite filibuster proof in the Senate. However, it is the most pro crypto Congress ever. So bipartisan cooperation could be the most effective way to produce this legislation. Now, there's a bunch of different proposals and bills working their way through: stable coins, Fit 21, market structure, tax clarity. Which of these do you think will be the easiest to get passed on a bipartisan basis?
Well, listen, I think you will see Congress looking for reasonable rules and regulations. And I think on the Republican side, every Republican is supportive of Bitcoin and crypto. On the Democrat side, uh, somewhat less than half the Democrats are supportive. And if you look at my DeFi CRA, that's a very good metric of where things are. The vote was 70-28. We got all the Republicans, 28 Democrats voted no. So going forward, there are a lot of things we can do. I just introduced legislation called the Flare Act. Now, the Flare Act is focused in particular on Bitcoin mining and using stranded gas. So if you go out to West Texas, you've got oil wells being drilled all over the place. You've got pump jacks that are producing oil. And typically when oil is coming out, you have what's called stranded gas, and that's gas that is produced along with the oil. And it's not economical to take that natural gas and put it in a pipeline to transport it to be used. So right now what you see is it's just lit on fire. If you go out to West Texas, it's called flaring, and you will see natural gas just being burned to consume it. Now, that is a waste of a valuable resource, and it's not good for the environment. Flaring natural gas is not good for the environment. And so the Flare Act uses the tax laws to incentivize capturing that natural gas and using it to mine Bitcoin. And that is a win-win. It's using natural resources effectively and productively. It's helping the environment by stopping the flaring of gases. And it's giving an economical way to capture that by incentivizing the mining of Bitcoin. And so that's a win-win. I'm hopeful legislation like that we'll see moving in the Senate and being signed into law.
But the other side of the question is, what is going to be harder to get passed? Where's the kind of the challenges that you see right now on that kind of laundry list of things that the industry is looking for, like, stable coins or tax clarity or Fit 21? Where do you think the friction is going to be?
Look, I think the biggest challenge is having enough time for Congress to understand crypto and Bitcoin mining. A couple of years ago, we had legislation, the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually what set the stage for Joe Biden's IRS rule attacking crypto. And at the time, I introduced an amendment to strip out the provision in that bill that was included to attack the crypto industry. And one of the things I said at the Senate floor at the time is I said, listen, there are not 5 senators, this was probably 3 years ago, there are not 5 senators who could tell you what the hell a Bitcoin is. And that's just the reality. Listen, I serve in a body where the median age is about 106. I have colleagues that reminisce about Eisenhower. And it wasn't too long ago, one of my colleagues, and this is real, described the internet as, quote, a system of tubes. This is not a technologically savvy group. I would rather they do nothing than that they affirmatively harm crypto and Bitcoin. I want America to be an oasis for crypto and Bitcoin. Let me be clear. I want Texas to be the greatest oasis on the face of the planet for all of Bitcoin and all of crypto. You see other places, you see places like Florida that are trying to compete. I welcome healthy competition. But at the end of the day, in Texas, we've got abundant, low-cost energy. We have a spirit that embraces entrepreneurship, and I think Texas is the greatest place on the face of the planet for crypto and for Bitcoin.
I want to now turn to that IRS rule. You've mentioned a few times, but let's just try to understand it a little bit more for our audience. As far as I understand, the rule required decentralized exchanges to collect usernames and addresses for tax reporting. Now, critics say that killing this rule would make it easier for bad actors to exploit crypto for money laundering or tax evasion, even terrorist financing. So why should crypto platforms, in your opinion, be exempt from the same kind of reporting requirements that every bank in America already has to follow?
Well, because they're not banks in America, they're not broker-dealers. If you look at the computer programmers that are creating decentralized financing, they're enabling the exchange of cryptocurrency without a third-party intermediary. So the programmers who are writing these apps, They never take possession of a cryptocurrency. They don't have it. You ask them, give them the customers' names and addresses. They don't have them. They never collect them. They're computer programmers. And this is something, as I said, most of my colleagues don't understand at all. But decentralized finance is producing all sorts of new innovation. And to treat them as a broker-dealer that takes custody of a stock or bond and has physical custody with a particular customer it's putting a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't fit at all. It was impossible for DeFi to comply with it. And frankly, the Elizabeth Warrens and Gary Genslers of the world didn't care.
Now, just on that topic of control, you're also introducing legislation, the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. Now, it aims to prohibit the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency, both directly and indirectly. And your concerns are about privacy and government overreach. Another thing you mentioned was the stifling of innovation. So why do you think that a Fed-issued digital dollar would stifle innovation instead of spurring it?
Well, I think a central bank digital currency is a terrible idea. And the reason that you have some on the left that want to see a CBDC is because they want government to be able to engage in monitoring, to be able to engage in surveillance, to have complete transparency of every financial transaction you undertake. Look, these are the same people that want to ban cash. These are the same people, if you remember Joe Biden's misnamed bill that he called Build Back Better, I called Build Back Broke. It include within it a provision requiring banks to report to the federal government every single transaction you engaged in that was $400 or more. That means every rent payment, every mortgage payment you sent, every car payment in most instances. Heck, a lot of the times that's a grocery bill for a family is $400 if it's a family with some kids. And it was literally putting Big Brother, or Janet Yellen, I like to call Big Sister. She wanted to know every financial transaction you're engaging in. And a CBDC, the big government command and control types, they look at it as a tool that the government can monitor your financial transactions. I'm a big supporter of cash. I don't want the government monitoring your financial transactions, and I don't want the government creating a CBDC. I want crypto to be generated from the private sector, from entrepreneurs. I think Bitcoin is the gold standard when it comes to crypto, but I also think there's an enormous amount of new innovation. And listen, the newer the innovation is, the more risk that is entailed by that, but I'd much rather it be in the private sector rather than giving the government the tool to surveil you. And when it comes to the Federal Reserve, I'll say Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay has sat on that couch right behind me, and I'll tell you, when he sits in my office, he sounds like Milton Friedman. He sounds like a great free market guy, and I'm very confident when he sits in Elizabeth Warren's office, he sounds like Comrade Marx. And the Fed, I have not been able to nail Jay Powell down on whether the Fed has authority to create a CBDC. I think the answer is clearly no, but I want to pass legislation to make unequivocally clear that we will not see a CBDC from the Fed. And I got to tell you, Maxwell, if God forbid Kamala Harris had won and we had a Democrat House and Senate, I think you would see the Fed create a CBDC. And I think you would see the federal government come after crypto and Bitcoin with a vengeance. And I do think that was one of the real issues in this election, was stopping that assault on our freedom and stopping that assault on the entire crypto industry.
Yeah. Now, I noticed, though, that all of the co-sponsors of this bill are Republican. Now, going back to my question before about what's going to be challenging, what's going to be the easiest, why isn't this a bipartisan issue?
It should be, and that's a great question to ask my Democrat colleagues. Listen, it was very interesting when we voted on the DeFi CRA. I didn't know where the votes would be. Now, I had the votes to win because the CRA only takes 50 votes, and we have 53 Republicans, so I knew I was going to win. And I thought there was a real possibility that we would get. The vote we got didn't shock me, but literally when I went down to the floor, there are very few Democrats who are outspoken in favor of crypto. Kirsten Gillibrand from New York is a good friend. Kirsten actively began whipping Democrats in favor of my CRA. And so we had some very liberal Democrats. Adam Schiff voted for my CRA. Chuck Schumer voted for my CRA. I laughed when Schumer voted for it. I said, shoot, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should vote no on my own provision. All of that was a surprise. I had no idea that was going to happen until the last minute. And so When it comes to something like preventing a CBDC, there have just not been Democrats. Listen, Elizabeth Warren looms very large in their party. In the Biden administration, she drove a lot of the policies from the Treasury Department, a lot of the economic policies. It's why the Biden administration and Kamala Harris had such deep antipathy to crypto and Bitcoin, is because Elizabeth Warren and the far left, they hate it. Hopefully, the CRA that we just passed will encourage more Democrats to come together. I hope we can find some middle ground. I would certainly welcome that.
Now, I know we don't have much time, but I just have two more questions. One of them is it's kind of a dream of the crypto industry, and there's been a lot of chatter about this Bitcoin reserve. Now, we do have a strategic reserve that Donald Trump signed, President Donald Trump. But in your kind of vision, what does a Bitcoin reserve look like to you? Is that the U.S. government buying Bitcoin from the open market, or like it is now, just not selling the Bitcoin it already has?
Look, I'll tell you, on that idea, I'm keeping my powder dry. I think there could be potential benefits from it, but there could be also real potential downsides. My general approach to government is I don't like the federal government picking winners and losers. And I don't really want the federal government saying, okay, this cryptocurrency we like, this one we don't like. What that invites is political corruption. What that invites is people making self-interested decisions. So I'd much rather see the federal government do no harm and let the innovation come from the private sector, rather than having the Fed deciding, okay, your cryptocurrency is awesome, but yours sucks, and we're going to do nothing and destroy it. That's a really dangerous scenario, and so I'm hesitant about that entire scenario.
And if it were just Bitcoin, let's say, just as a strategic reserve, is there any plans for legislation to, enshrine that so that the next administration can't just come in and start selling that stockpile?
Look, there has been discussion of that, and one avenue that you can have a strategic reserve is if you have, for example, assets that are forfeited. Let's say there's a criminal case, you got a drug dealer, and you're forfeiting his fancy house in Miami and his Lamborghini, and he's got a bunch of Bitcoin. In that instance, you have the government will engage in criminal or civil forfeiture and acquire some Bitcoin. And I don't think it's unreasonable for the government to preserve those as assets. I think that is different from going out in the market and picking which cryptocurrencies that we're going to expend taxpayer dollars buying. As I said, I would have real hesitancy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure crypto would be happy with where that ends up in a few years.
Yeah, definitely. Now, final question. I've been in the industry for many years now, I think 8 or 9 years. I've seen the rise and fall many times. After the collapse of FTX, just most recently, the previous administration came down really hard on the industry. I think that could be seen as one of the spurring, events that really pushed Gensler and the Biden administration to crack down. Now, here we are in 2025, and you have many politicians on both sides of the aisle that are more or less tying themselves to crypto, or at least, becoming more positive towards crypto. But what happens if there's another major crash or fraud? Do you think the Trump administration would have reversed its course?
Well, let me be clear. I wouldn't overstate it about having many politicians on both sides of the aisle who are defending crypto. I don't know many Democrats who are. When my CRA was on the floor, I ended up getting the votes of just under 20 Democrats, but that was a total surprise. Virtually none of them were vocal about it. When they came down and voted yes, it shocked the heck out of everyone. So I don't think the folks listening and watching this should be confused. They're not a bunch of Democrats who are out vocally defending Bitcoin and crypto. The basic range of it is you have a bunch of Democrats who hate Bitcoin and crypto and want to destroy it. And then there are others who have not gone quite that far, but I don't know anyone else. Look, I've been very vocal, standing up and fighting to defend crypto. Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming has been very vocal, standing up to defend crypto. She's a Republican as well. There have been a handful of Democrats, but not many. And so I think the uncertainty, you're right, if there is another scandal, I think the uncertainty, there's a risk that the Democrats will turn hard on crypto, just like they did in the Biden administration. On the Trump side, I am hopeful that we will see a light touch regulatory approach that allows for innovation. I think that's what we're going to see, and it's what I expect. It's certainly what I'm advocating for with the president and with the administration.